Well, I was looking at the death of Ibrahim Raisi, the president, and in the light of the killing or assassination of Qasem Soleimani,
Mhm.
who was the head of the IRGC, second most powerful figure in Iran. And, the circumstances are the same, although I can't be sure that an assassination took place here. The circumstance was that, Donald Trump refused to was as much of a kind of stooge of Netanyahu as he wasn't going to give Netanyahu what he wanted, which is for the US to engage directly in a regional war with Iran on behalf of Israel. That's Netanyahu's ultimate dream. It's his life's work is to get the US to attack Iran on behalf of Israel. Because he recognizes that there is no resistance without Iran to Zionism,
Right.
and Israel's entire uh, expansionist ambition can be realized without Iran. So Soleimani was killed through after a long campaign of Netanyahu lobbying and manipulating, mainly through Mike Pompeo, former CIA director who became Secretary of State, until they could finally convince Trump to do it. They killed him on his way to with uh, a peace conference in Iraq with Saudi Arabia, which was also very threatening. I think the whole idea of Iran and the Saudis coming together, maybe working together through BRICS, would be deeply, deeply damaging to the whole Western divide and conquer strategy. They killed him. Raisi was killed following this exchange between Iran and Israel, in which Israel attacked Iran's consulate in Syria, in Damascus, an attack on sovereign Iranian territory, brazen, something we've never seen before, more brazen than the US attack on the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. And they were trying to draw the US in. And what did the Biden administration do? They directly told Israel, we're going to send the Patriot batteries. We're going to get the Jordanians to help take down the Iranian inevitable counterattack. And they did. Then they told Israel, take the W, take the win, but we're not going to respond and attack Iran. And then suddenly, on a helicopter containing not just Raisi, but also the foreign minister and top religious figures, it goes down. The other two helicopters land. The political conditions are the same. So it, the question is, the question is, how does the ruling faction in the US, which controls the White House, respond to the constant Israeli push to provoke the US into attacking Iran, an attack which I think contravenes US national interests. And the US does have national interests which diverge strongly from Israel's. I think on the generally US national interests diverge from Israel's at this point in history. And the Biden administration and the Trump administration are slightly different there. I think while both would enable a genocide and be happy to cast the Palestinians into the dustbin of history or the gas chamber of history, whatever it is with this this live streamed Holocaust we're witnessing. And they would maybe differ in their rhetoric about the Palestinians. The the Democratic faction wants to make a deal with a kind of reformist authority in Iran that would be similar in their minds to the Camp David deal with Egypt. And they would slowly domesticate Iran and bring them in, but also allow Iran to have an economy and to be sort of a mid-level power. Maybe sometime at some point in the future, it could be kind of like Turkey. But the Republicans, particularly Trump, are under the influence of a much more vitriolic, rabid Zionist force led by the Adelson family, Sheldon Adelson, who said that he wished that the US would drop a nuclear weapon on Iran, who's dead, but his wife runs his fortune. It's a cutout for Israeli intelligence. Adelson and Netanyahu are the same thing, and they have full control over Trump Incorporated. So I think uh, until next January, we're going to see some resistance by Washington towards getting directly involved with Iran. I mean, another thing we can look at is the sort of flotilla that the Biden administration sent, USS Eisenhower, an aircraft carrier, as well as destroyers and cruiser class ships to the Mediterranean after October 7th as a message to Hezbollah. That was their attempt to kind of reassure Israel and tell them, hey, we're not going to let Iran or attack you, and we're going to make sure Hezbollah doesn't overrun you. But it was also a way of saying that's as far as we're going to go. Take it or leave it. So that's my view on, and I could be proven wrong, but I would expect, as long as Biden's in there, many more provocations to come between now and November, particularly, possibly an October surprise on behalf of Trump. Netanyahu certainly wants Trump in there. And I think we'll see provocations in the United States. Something I'm incredibly afraid of is a kind of anti-Semitic false flag attack, or just an actual anti-Semitic lone wolf attack, which is inspired by all of the violence that Israel's committing and the images of it that are spreading like wildfire across the internet.
Well, the Israelis have long prodded or attempted to prod the United States, going all the way back to the Bush administration, into a war with Iran. And remember that the Israel lobby was fundamental to pushing the United States into a war with Iraq. All of these neocons, Wolfowitz, Pearl, Louis Scooter Libby, they were also extremely close to the Zionist lobby. So it's a very foolish, dangerous provocation. I think the restraint has been shown not by Israel, of course, but or even the United States, which has deployed warships to the Persian Gulf, but by Iran and by Hezbollah. Hezbollah does not want a repeat of 1982 in Lebanon, where West Beirut was flattened by the Israeli Air Force. Iran is very wary about getting into a direct conflict. They will do it through proxies, like through Hezbollah. So I think that's where the restraint has come from. However, Israel keeps pushing and baiting Iran, provoking Iran to respond. They are going to have to respond somehow. How calibrated that response will be will determine whether we escalate the conflict or not. But I would say that certainly since October 7th, Hezbollah and Iran have shown incredible restraint. The real acts of resistance have come, as I said before, from Yemen, almost solely from Yemen. Yes, it's true that Hezbollah has shelled the northern part of Israel, and I think 80,000 Israelis have had to move, and a few people have been killed. But given the capacity that Hezbollah militarily has, they have shown tremendous restraint.
There are some, including not as much military experts, like I'm thinking of people like Norman Finkelstein, who says that the combined power of Hezbollah, Iran, and the other allies it has in the region would be something that Israeli army cannot match. Do you buy that argument?
Well, I don't. I think that any conflict between Israel and Iran would be in the air. I don't see Iranian troops storming through Syria to attack Israel. So as long as it is essentially an aerial conflict, no, I would disagree. Um, and I don't see Hezbollah storming over the northern border of Israel into Israel either. So I think what we're talking about is perhaps a ground incursion by Israel into southern Lebanon. Um, but I don't see this as a war actually between armies. Logistically, I'm not sure how that would work. Um, and number one. Number two, I don't think they want it. So I'm not sure I agree with that analysis, because Israel supplied by, Israel supplied by the United States, as we've seen in Gaza, can sustain over the long period a pretty formidable air campaign.
I want to move to other areas, but just a final question on the Middle East. We had Ambassador Chas Freeman, and he argued that, as you just said, that the American involvement in Iraq was significantly instigated by Israel. Thinking about, you have been covering the Middle East for a long time, thinking about American involvement in the region and the instability it has created all over, is it fair to blame just Israel when it comes to the American involvement in the region?
No, I don't think. I think Israel and the United States were full partners in these debacles, but they were full partners, and we had Israel. I mean, there's all sorts of fingerprints of Israel in Iraq, including in Abu Ghraib. So uh, yeah, I'm not saying that Israel was the sole engine for what happened in Iraq, but it was an important and a primary player in terms of pushing the United States into the war. Remember, we're talking about the first Iraq war, the invasion of Iraq. There was heavy opposition within the State Department, the CIA, even within the military. The Arabists were not behind this war, and so what you had is Dick Cheney, who was Secretary of Defense, creating his own kind of rogue unit to cook intelligence to pass it on to the White House. And Israel was deeply involved in that. That's a little caveat that I think a lot of people miss, that the establishment was not supportive of the war. And I know that because I was brought to these institutions to speak against the war, including the State Department at West Point. And they knew what I was going to say. They couldn't say it, but they knew what I was going to say. And Israel was deeply involved in all of that. That subterfuge, those lies about weapons of mass destruction, the whole fantasy of first Baghdad and then Tehran. Israel was deeply involved in all of that. And the architects of the war had very, very close links to Israel and the Zionist lobby.
It is said that somewhere in the middle of the 1990s, during the Clinton administration, there was a shift in American foreign policy in the Middle East from balancing Iran and Iraq to double containment of Iran and Iraq. And it is said that Israel was very significant in pushing forward this shift in American policy in the region.
Yeah, that's correct. And of course, it it ended up being completely counterproductive because what it did is solidify a Shiite alliance between Baghdad and Tehran, and so the balance is gone. In many ways, Iran won the war, quite literally, because we forget that with ISIS, which is Sunni, when they rose up, they were militarily increasingly dominant, and you had all sorts of Iranian militias and probably Iranian uh, revolutionary guard forces crossing the border. There was a tacit alliance at a certain point between the United States and Iran to defeat ISIS and the Caliphate, and Iran played a significant part of that. And the Americans would I mean visually even see Iranian units and not fire on them because they were in tacit alliance. So and what we saw is because of course before under Saddam Hussein, the Sunni minority dominated Iraq and was very pro-Western, and that has changed.
That policy shift towards double containment was primarily because of Israel's instigation.
Yes, I think that's the case. I was at the Defense Department at the time. This policy was suddenly imposed on us by a political appointee, Martin Indyk, actually, who had been an Israeli citizen and was naturalized one day before taking up his responsibilities in the National Security Council staff. It was very hard for me or others in the region to see what benefit we would get from a policy that is fatiguing, expensive, and consumes a lot of resources. We had a policy of offshore balancing, which relied on balancing Iran and with other Arab countries, including Iraq, and which worked very well. The Gulf War coincided pretty much with the end of the Iran-Iraq face-off, and there was really no reason to choose to be in opposition to both rather than to continue to use their enmity to maintain balance. But both were enemies of Israel. And therefore, one has to assume that this was contrived for the benefit of Israel. I don't see what benefit it brought to us.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.